Hello, everyone, and welcome to this SharePoint online training. Today, we're going to talk about basics of libraries, or library basics. My name is Scott Kinsella. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer and Microsoft Office Specialist Master, which is a long way of saying I work with Microsoft Office a lot. So yeah, I'm an MCT. I've been one of those for over 10 years. I think I'm up to like 11th year or something like that by now. I've kind of lost track. But in that area, I specialize in all of the Microsoft end user products. So all that stuff you kind of use every day in Office and Office 365 and all that sort of good desktop products, that's where my specialty lies. I have been teaching these products for over 23 years. I started out with Office 4.3 way back in the 90s and have worked with this product family ever since then. So been around the block at least maybe one or two times. Currently, I work for a company called Planet Technologies based up in Germantown, Maryland, and I spend most of my time working on government or federal contracts, delivering training and training services and all that sort of fun stuff for my clients. So today, what we want to talk about in this session, again, sticking with the SharePoint Basics series of classes that I've been doing here online and also posting the videos here to YouTube, what we want to do is build upon the SharePoint Introduction class. Now, if you haven't watched that video yet or attended that class, you'll be okay because we're going to review some of the things from there, at least the stuff about libraries from there, and expand upon it. That's the whole idea of this course, as well as the one that goes with it, which is the list basics, where we'll spend the whole session just talking about lists. So if you didn't watch the intro video or if you haven't come to that class yet, you'll be okay, but I'd recommend at some point that you at least attend the class or watch the video. But our intent today is to take that small chunk that we did in the intro class. We did about 15 minutes on libraries, which is definitely not enough. And what we want to do in this session is expand that to a full 90 minutes. Let's talk about libraries and all of the things that we can do there because there's a lot involved. So with that being said, here is our agenda for this class. I do want to do kind of a review / introduction to libraries. We want to take some time to learn how to navigate our libraries. We have some things to deal with there because there's two different interfaces, and we'll talk about that. We will spend a very, very short amount of time just understanding permissions. That's an important thing to always within SharePoint to remind ourselves about. So we'll take just a few minutes to talk about the whole permissions situation. Then we're going to talk about adding files to a library. It really is one of the most important things that we do, is that if you do start off with a brand new library, you do need to get content up there. So we'll go through some of the methods that you have available to get your files up there, whether it's uploading or saving directly to that library or whatever. We'll talk about that. And then the next thing is, once you've got content and files up there, let's talk about what happens with opening and editing. There are different issues that we have to be concerned about there. Then we'll spend a good chunk of time just talking about basic file management things. So there's all kinds of process features and things that we can do to the files while they're in SharePoint, and we want to cover some of those basic ones in this session. And then lastly, we'll talk very briefly about file storage and sharing options. As we start to work in a more modern Office and working with Office 365 and all of these cloud features that we've got, sometimes we have to think about or wonder about, all right, if I've got this file, where do I put it? Should I put it on the network? Should I put it on OneDrive? Should I put it on SharePoint? Should it be out in Teams? We'll take a little bit of time to talk about that at the end of class. For those of you who are attending online, as always, if you have a question, please just type it into the Zoom group chat window. I'll try to keep my eyes occasionally looking over at the other monitor to see if any questions come up. You can always hold your questions till the end of training. We'll stop the recording and we'll do question and answers at the end. So I think that was enough of the intro. Let's get into the real intro and talk about libraries. So as we established in the introduction class, there are three main content categories that we have in SharePoint. Basically, when I have any sort of information or files or data or whatever, there are three main buckets that information could go into. It could either go on some type of page, it can go to some type of list, or it could go into some type of library. And in this class, we want to focus on the libraries. completely. In the introduction class, we spent about 15 minutes on each one of those, 15 minutes on pages, 15, and so on and so forth. Definitely not enough time to really go in depth, but enough time to give you some flavor of what those are. With this session now, let's just focus on libraries. We got all kinds of great things about libraries that we want to talk about. So we're going to take that deep dive into libraries as a content feature of SharePoint. So let's review, or give you some new information. So like your network drives or your laptop or home computer or whatever you've got, SharePoint libraries are where we put files. At their most basic, it's where you put the Word documents and the spreadsheets and the PDFs and the PowerPoints and the photo, anything that's a file generally goes into a SharePoint library. So in that sense, SharePoint libraries are just like the network, okay, or your C drive or H drive or whatever you have. It's a place to put stuff. What differentiates SharePoint libraries from all those other sort of options is that we have additional what we call features and functions, or process features, to do things to those files. When you put files on your C drive or your H drive or whatever you happen to have at work, the reality is it's still just dumb storage. It's just a place to put the files, and there's not really a lot of functionality there other than basic things like renaming, copying, and moving. But in SharePoint, we have all kinds of process features available to us to help us work with those files and collaborate. So we have things like version control. We have check-in and check-out. We have content approval. We have workflows. We have sharing and collaboration features all over the place in SharePoint. So we have all of these extra tools and things that make SharePoint libraries much more modern, much more efficient for working together with other users, and that's the whole point. These process features are what make libraries a better option for storing, sharing, editing, and collaborating on files. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with putting stuff on your computer or putting it on your H drive or network drive or whatever you've got. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that if all you're really trying to do is just store the file. But if you're going to get into any sort of sharing and collaboration, especially, it's not those just aren't a good place to do it. You really do want to get SharePoint involved for that, okay? And even in the editing aspect, depending on how you want to look at it, SharePoint has additional options that you wouldn't find if your file was stored somewhere else. So that's what makes SharePoint libraries so much better, and especially not so much in this intro basics, but when we get into the intermediate level of libraries, we'll really get into sharing and collaboration with files. So with libraries in SharePoint, we have lots of pre-made ones that Microsoft has put out there for us already. And it's just like in Word or Excel, where there's already templates where, okay, I need a resume, I need a fax cover sheet, I need some sort of letter. And in Word, you can go to the pre-made documents or templates and find one and make use of it, and all is well with the world. SharePoint's no different. There are a bunch of already pre-made libraries that you can pick from and put those in SharePoint. Microsoft has been calling these apps instead of templates. They used to be called templates. I think they're trying to be cute, like, you've got apps on your phone, so we have apps in SharePoint. It doesn't fly with me, but just realize that's that's what Microsoft is calling them now. I still like to call them templates. Anyways, like any template in any product, that's only a starting point. You could use it just like it's out of the box, or you can certainly customize it to meet your needs. And again, in the intermediate/advanced classes, we'll get into that sort of customization. To keep things simple for libraries especially, even though there are like these 8 different types, the reality is that 99% of the time you're going to be working with some sort of document library. Now that document library may be customized. It may have special columns and other features and things turned on, but at its core, it's still a document library. It's just like cars. Cars come in all different colors and shapes and models and everything. But the reality is, if they've all got gas engines, it's all basically the same things under the hood. basically. So the same deal here. Your document libraries that you encounter may be customized in lots of different things, but the reality is the engine underneath is really the same on all of them. So we're just going to look at document libraries in this session because that's pretty much the most common one you're going to see. So the next thing to understand about libraries is that you can have multiple. Okay. Generally, when you set up a new site or if a site is set up for you, yes, generally that site automatically, again, thinking templates, even sites have templates when a site is created for you. Yes, a bunch of stuff is created automatically. And within that site template, yes, you get a library. Ta-da, you've got a shared document library already there. But the reality is, just like we can, with anything in SharePoint, we can always customize it. We can change stuff, we can add stuff, we can modify it, and so on and so forth. And that is also certainly the case with libraries, is that we can add as many different separate libraries onto a site as we feel like we need to have, okay? You're not limited to one. I can take that document library and add it over and over again to my site. And maybe in each different library, maybe it's got a different purpose, maybe there's different metadata required. Maybe one library uses check-in, check-out, but another one has major minor versioning along with content approval. Again, there's lots of variations and things that you can have. But the key thing to note is there's not just one library. I mean, there always is at least one, hopefully, but there's nothing that says you're only limited to one. You can add that document library as many times as you need to a site. Generally, when we do have multiple libraries, there are different access permissions needed or different settings for the process settings for the files, which I already talked about. Again, maybe you have one plain old library, you got another one where there's major minor version control, another one there's content approval and workflows. That's generally why we have separate libraries for things. Now, creating and adding libraries to a site and what's all involved with that is, again, well beyond the scope of what we want to talk about today. There's all kinds of things that go into that. But what is important to understand, again, you can have more than one library on a site. That's the important thing to remember. So to summarize this introduction, let's review a few points I think that are really important to take away. First off, look, libraries are our file repositories. They are the place where we put the files. What makes them different from the network is all of the process features. Yes, your C drive, your H drive is a place where you can put files, but that's all you end up doing is putting the files there. There's not much that happens. Secondly, the primary type of library that you're going to run into and have on SharePoint is something called a document library. There are other types, but 99% of the time you're going to run into a document library. It might be highly customized, but underneath the hood, they're all still document libraries. And lastly, any particular site on SharePoint can have multiple libraries. Generally speaking, there's always at least one. Okay, one comes with the template. There's usually one there, but you could have more. And that depends on whether you're the site owner or somebody else set it up or whatever. Okay. All right, so now let's talk navigation. How do we get around? Okay, we've got this library. What are the tools and things that we have to make our way and get around the library? The next thing to understand, or first thing, depending how you look at it for this section, there are two interface types for all things in SharePoint. Unlike other products where Microsoft just kind of introduces a new interface and says, okay, you're stuck with this now, like they did when we went from Office 2003 to Office 2007, right? That was a huge change between them. And there was no option when we got into Office 2007 to say, oh, you like the old interface here? No, you had to use the new interface. Unfortunately, with SharePoint, Microsoft has been slowly phasing in over the last 3 years, I guess, this new interface called Modern or New Experience. And unfortunately, they just keep doing it in bits and pieces. So what you're going to run into is that some libraries may still use the classic interface and other libraries may use the modern interface. By default, if you do create a new library, the default experience is to use modern. However, the library owner can easily change that, okay? Or if you have a legacy or older SharePoint site that's been around for a while, it might actually still be using classic. So for the rest of today, as I go through all of these things, like from this point on, I will be demonstrating things on both classic and modern. Now, the question always comes up, which one is better? My answer to that is both and neither. Uh, I know. There are definitely some things about each that I like better, and there are definitely things about each that I hate. And unfortunately, that's just the way we got to deal with it right now. Is that, yeah, sometimes I love modern for some of the things that it does, but as you're going to see, there's some things about modern that are kind of annoying. So we're just going to have to deal with it. Now, to quickly kind of bring about more about that so you understand, when we do talk classic, yes, that's the interface that's been around since 2010, and that's what makes SharePoint look like Office 2010 or 2013. The modern interface looks more like the more modern Office 365 applications like Planner and Forms and OneDrive as a more modern, simplified interface. So we'll see those examples here very, very shortly. All right. The default interface for a library is set by the owner. So whoever is the owner of the library is the one that can say, let's use modern or let's use classic. That's their choice, okay? Sometimes you can switch it temporarily to the other, but not always. Okay, that's just how it is. If it's available, I'll show you the link. If it's not, it just won't be there. And that's also not a permanent switch. If, for instance, if it's a modern library and you temporarily switch it to classic, the next time you come back, it's going to be back in the modern interface. Okay, and if it's already in classic, you generally can't switch over to modern. That's also just kind of one of the weird things about all of this business. Okay, all right. So in either case, no matter which interface is being used, there are certain parts that are in common with both and some that aren't. So we're going to go through all of these things that are on the list to get an understanding of where to find them and what do they do for helping us get around and do stuff in the library, okay? Many of these things are similar to things you see in other Microsoft products. Mostly in classic, but some of them may be new or unfamiliar. Some of them may be familiar or unfamiliar in the modern. It just depends on how much you've been using Office 365. Okay, so let's bring up the site that I've got that has both the classic and the modern interfaces. So here is a library using the classic interface. And here is a library using the modern interface. Now, these are two different libraries. It just happens to be, though, that they've got the same set of files. They're both on the same site. It's just that in one, I said use the modern interface, and in the other, use the classic. So this isn't one library where I'm going to keep switching interfaces. It is two separate libraries, just so you understand what we're doing here. So we got that down. So again, here's classic. It kind of looks like Office 2010. Okay, we've got a ribbon and tabs and so on and so forth up along the top. And here is the modern. So let's first talk about, let's talk about the ribbon. In the classic interface, we have a ribbon that's just like Office 2010, 2013, and so on and so forth. As a matter of fact, even the current version of Office still uses a ribbon like this. You have three tabs: a Browse tab, which basically hides the other tabs, a Files tab, and a Library tab. And this is just like in Office. You click the different tabs, and you can see icons and labels for all the different buttons and features that are available here. Depending on the size of your window, going left and right, certain features may be collapsed or hidden, okay? In the modern interface, we have what's called the simplified ribbon. And basically, your ribbon is right here. It has a lot fewer options. In the classic view, literally every button that exists is visible here. So all you gotta do is kind of look around and find the one you want. In Modern, it uses a simplified ribbon. So you may not see the thing you might be looking for because it's either somewhere else, or the simplified ribbon is much more contextual, which means that when I select something, like if I select this bank accounts file, now my ribbon is going to change to just the commands that are relevant to what I did. That's something we see in Office a lot in general. Excuse me for 1 second. Okay, so we'll go through where to find commands here in just a moment. Okay, so the classic interface uses a large ribbon-based interface like we still see in the desktop version of Office. And the modern interface uses a single line simplified ribbon, okay? A lot less things to look at. And that's Microsoft's overall philosophy in a lot of products nowadays, is to not give you this gigantic smorgasbord of options in front of you. That's very off-putting to new users. So it just says, look, here are the things that you really just need. Now, on the flip side, us advanced users, at least myself, get a little frustrated because we're used to having everything all right there, and now you may have to hunt for things a little bit more. That is one of the things I don't like about the modern interface, is it does force you to kind of look for the other commands. So we just have to get used to that. Okay, next let's talk about breadcrumb trail. The breadcrumb trail is basically, in any library, shows me where I'm at as far as the path, the folder path, which is just like we would see in Windows Explorer when you're navigating your C drive or H drive. It is located right in the modern interface. It's right here, right above the, right below the ribbon and above the column headings. So basically, if I went into this folder named Hallie, it now starts to build a path up here showing me where I'm at inside the library. So if I went down another folder, there would be another angle bracket here and the name of the folder that I'm in, and that would just keep going across here. And any one of these I could click to return back up or down a particular level. So that's what's called the breadcrumb trail. Literally, that's its name. In the classic interface, the breadcrumb trail will appear and disappear depending on what tab is selected. And that's what the browse tab is for over here in the classic interface, is that if I do click, in this case, I've got a folder here called Heather. Let's click on the Heather folder. When I go into that folder, I've gone down one level, but notice that the breadcrumb trail is up top. Okay, if I happen to click any part of the ribbon, the breadcrumb trail disappears. Okay, that's in the classic interface. In modern, if I've got a breadcrumb trail, the trail and the ribbon don't interfere with each other because they're in different spots. Unless you've really got a lot of folders, you're not really going to see much with the breadcrumb trail. Okay. All right, next, the quick access toolbar. Now, this is something that is only in the classic interface. It's similar to the quick access toolbar that you have in Word or Excel, which would be right up here along the top of the screen. You have those little buttons. Here in SharePoint, they, because sometimes maybe you don't see the ribbon, or because there are commands that you use a lot and you don't have to hunt for them, they created this little quick access toolbar right here. Okay, and it has basically 4 buttons on it. You can't customize it. You can't really change any of it. So while it's convenient for certain popular commands, if there are commands that you really like, you can't put them there. Unlike in Word and PowerPoints and all those products where you can customize that. The quick access toolbar has completely disappeared here in the modern interface, mostly because the ribbon has kind of moved into the same spot. So it would just be weird to have another set of buttons down here. So basically in the modern interface, we got rid of the quick access toolbar, we got rid of the big ribbon, and now it's just all combined into one simple line right here. So you're really gonna only see this quick access toolbar if you're in the classic interface. Okay? All right, next, let's talk about views. Now, views can go in multiple places here, and we will actually revisit the ability to change views when we get into the managing files section. But there's a little bit I want to talk about here as far as views. SharePoint libraries, just like Windows, have the ability to change how you see the files. And in the modern interface, if you come over here to where it says All Documents and you click the drop down, in the top section here, you actually have different ways that you can view the files, either as a list, a compact list, or as tiles. So for instance, I could select tiles, and that's going to turn my library into like the large icon view that you would have in Windows. So now I see little thumbnails, and the folders are all up here, and I can see all this stuff in I can see my library this way. Or I could select a compact list, and that would show my files in a more compact format, which kind of almost looks like Classic in a way because it's a little tighter. And then the other view that we've got here that's built in is the list view. Now, we'll talk about other custom views later. These are things that are just kind of built in right now. This is a feature that we find, at least in this sense right now, that we only find over in Modern. There are views in general of how we can change how the files are displayed, but as far as the ones I just talked about here, as far as like list, compact list, and tiles, which are the only ones I'm concerned about right now, we'll talk about other types of views later. This just doesn't exist over in Classic. Okay? In general, views are different ways to display the files. And if they're available, in Classic, they're going to be listed here. And in Modern, they're going to be on this drop down over here. All right. All right. Next, let's talk briefly about search. Look, we all know what search is. It's not complicated. You click in the box and you tell it what to look for. The main difference here between Classic and Modern is where is that box located. In the Modern interface, it is usually over here. What happened to my search box? Seems to have oh, I'm sorry, they moved it up top now. I need to fix my slide. See, this is things that Microsoft does. They move things around. I forgot. I need to fix that. Sorry, ignore what's on the slide. They've moved, it used to be over here, right at the top of the menu, but now it's up top where you generally find search and other programs. So this actually makes sense, and I kind of like this, but I forgot about that. I'm sorry, I'm human, I make mistakes. The search is up top. In Classic, it's right here. It literally says find a file, and that's how we search the library. Search is search, okay? I'm not gonna waste your time and my time talking about it. You know, click in the box, tell it what you're looking for, and run the search. That's all we need to know about that at this point. So yeah, the search for libraries in Modern has moved up to the top. So I need to fix that. All right, next, our column headers. Now, the column headers do stuff for us, such as sorting and filtering, and we will talk more about that later. But for right now, I just want you to notice that in both the Modern and Classic libraries, there are headers up along the top here that tell us what each one of these columns represent, okay? Not rocket science, okay? This is the name column, this is the modified, this is modified by. Same thing, let me go back up to the main part of the library here. I have the same sorts of columns. Notice, and we will talk about this more in the managing files section, it's more obvious in Modern than it is in Classic. In Classic, this is one of the things I don't like about Classic. If I didn't tell you about what I'm about to show you, you'd maybe never know in Classic View that if you hover over a column heading, there's a drop-down menu that you can do things like sorting and filtering from, okay? The problem is that if you're not clicked on that, you don't see that. Okay, there's nothing to indicate unless I've clicked on it or hovering that there's something else there. So in Modern, they fixed that. In Modern, there is always a little down arrow pointing right next to the name to visually let you know, hey, there is something you can do here. Now, it's basically the same thing, plus there's other stuff. There is sorting. There's also the ability to change settings and do filters. There's all kinds of new fun stuff hiding there, and we'll talk about that when we get to the managing files section. So in Classic, you just have to kind of remember there's a drop-down. In Modern, it's very obvious that there's a drop-down there. And we do things like sorting and filtering, which we'll cover later. So the files and folders that we see in a library are pretty much in the same order as we would see in Windows Explorer if we go with the defaults. Now, if you're dealing with a library that's been customized or there's a custom view or something like that, what you see here may be different. But at its basic, if nothing's been altered, libraries are displayed the same way as we do in Windows. It's folders first, A to Z, and then files, A to Z. It's as simple as that. Of course, that can be customized here in SharePoint. The other thing to note when we're dealing with the file and folder list is that over on the left-hand side of each file, there is a selector. Now, the shape is different. In the classic view, it's kind of a box. You'll see there's a little check mark, and I can select the file, and then it actually turns into a box. In the modern view, it's a circle. So I don't know if I'm supposed to call these check circles or selection boxes, even though it's actually a circle. I don't know. But basically, it's the same idea. I can select a file. We'll go over more of what we can do with that selection stuff later. Okay. Also, in the file and folder list, we see how we can get to other commands. In Classic, you'll notice that there are 3-dot menus all in this column right here that give me more options for working with each particular file. In Classic, though, almost all of the options are also up here on the ribbon. So they're actually in two places. We can find what we're looking for on the ribbon. We could also find it on the 3-dot menu. The big difference in modern is that often the 3-dot menu is the only place where we can find certain commands. So for instance, if I select this bank account file, this Excel file, my ribbon does change. But I've got a 3-dot menu up here with a lot more options that are hiding, as well as there is a 3-dot menu here with lots of options on it. Okay, some of these, yes, are already on the ribbon, and some of them are not. So with this whole simplified ribbon in the modern interface, you may have to hunt for particular commands. Unfortunately, that's just how it goes. Okay. All right. Lastly, good old page forward and backward. Okay, if you have more files than what can be displayed on the screen at one time, there'll be a simple set of left and right controls down at the bottom, and you can use that to go to the next page of files. The default for libraries is usually 30 files, but that can be changed by the owner, so they could set it to 100 or 50 or whatever they want. But I think we all know how to use those basic controls. So remember, just to kind of review here, remember that, you know, we've got a classic interface, we've got a modern interface, and we have different things available in each one. Some things that are in classic and not in modern, some things that are in modern, not in classic, and some that are in both. So yay for confusion, right? Also realize that I didn't even really touch on this. Customizations can also change some of these things. So your library may not have certain things at all. Just depends on what your SharePoint designers and owners have chosen to do in a particular library. So to quick review, at least this, to summarize, look, the SharePoint user interfaces, plural, there's two, are made of many standard and new elements. Most of these I think you've experienced in other products. Some may be new to you. They help you get around. All right. Let's talk permissions just for a couple of minutes, because it always is important to remember and discuss permissions in SharePoint. The things that you can do in a particular library depend on the permissions that you've been granted. Everything in SharePoint has permissions tied to it. So it's always important to know, you know, hey, I may not be able to do certain things here that I can do over in another spot because it's granted by the item or library or site owner. It depends on who owns the item to decide what type of access they want to dole out. Permissions in SharePoint in general can be basic as view only all the way up through full control. Okay. If you want more specifics about what each of these levels represents and what it means that you can and cannot do, I would suggest just checking the help. I'll have links to that here at the end of the presentation about where you can find more information about that. Now, to keep it simple for our purposes, in most cases, if not a lot, if no customizations and lots of things have been done, generally speaking, you're probably either going to have read or contribute access to a library. With read access, it's just like it sounds. You're going to be able to get into that library. You're going to be able to look at the files, but that's about it. You can't change anything. You can't edit stuff. You can sort, you can filter, but nothing else, okay? If you have the next level up, which is contribute, then yes, you will be allowed to upload files, make changes, edit things, modify the files at least, but you won't be able to change other things about structure and so on and so forth, okay? Again, be aware that every library may have different permissions. You might be the owner in one library, but only have read permission in another. There's nothing in SharePoint that says, I'm going to have contribute permission in all libraries. It can be set up that way, but that may not be what's exactly true, okay? It's kind of hard to tell from walking in when you go into a library what your permissions are, unfortunately. It'd be nice if you went into a library and there'd be a little something that says, you can only do this. Basically, the way they do it is that if you can't do the command, it's going to be grayed out or just not available. So that's basically the way that you find out. If you want more information about what level of permissions and stuff that you have, contact your library owner or your site owner. So that's all I really want to say about permissions. Just keep in mind, don't be surprised if you go into a library of one of the sites where you work and you're like, oh, well, Scott said I could do all these things, but I can't. What's going on? Well, you probably don't have permission. So the actions you can perform in a library really do depend on your permissions. And most commonly, you're probably going to have at least read or contribute permission. You may even be an owner. All right, so with all of that kind of background, now let's talk about adding files to a library. How do we get the content there? All right, because that's the most basic. Yes, if you're working with SharePoint sites and libraries that already exist, there may be files already there, but the reality is somebody had to put them there, and you may even have stuff that you want to put up there yourself. So I think that's the first thing we need to talk about is how do I get things there? And there are lots of methods, okay? But we're gonna look at four. We're gonna look at the four basic methods for getting stuff into a library. There are definitely more ways to do it, and we'll cover those in intermediate and advanced classes. But today, let's go with the four basic methods that we have. And those four basic methods are, first off, I can just upload the file. Next, I could create a file from scratch right in the library. I can just start brand new from there. I can save directly to a library right from the Microsoft Office products, and I can drag stuff to the library just by using Windows Explorer and my mouse, okay? All right, regardless of any of these four methods, just a refresher, you gotta have permissions. So if you only have read permission, you can't add stuff to a library. You must have at least contribute access to do that, okay? All right, so let's talk about the first method, and that is upload. And I think this is the easiest and most common one. As a matter of fact, I demonstrate this method in the intro class, and I mentioned there's other methods. And now we're going to talk about the other ones. But look, uploading is the easiest thing, right? How do I get it there? You upload it to the library, okay? Always the key thing to remember about uploading is this. You're making a copy. Okay, if your file was on the C drive and you upload it to SharePoint, the original stays on C and now you've got a copy out on SharePoint. Okay, that's always important, especially if you're the one doing the uploading. Why? Why is that important, audience? Well, since I don't want to waste everyone's time, the reason that's important is this, especially if you're the uploader, is now you've got two of them, make sure you edit the correct file. Because you could very easily accidentally go, all right, I'm going to edit blah, blah document, and you might end up editing your old local copy, and you're not editing the one that's out on SharePoint, and then people are editing this one here, and you're still editing that one, and then you end up with two copies of a file, and you're like, oh, how do I reconcile this? And that's another terrible topic, all right? So be sure if you're the uploader that you know you're making a copy of a file, okay? All right, so let's do a basic upload. regardless of whether it is classic or modern, the steps are basically the same. So I'll do it for modern and then I'll do it in classic, but you'll see it's essentially the same. So in a modern library, I'm going to, look, the button is right there, right on this simplified ribbon. I'm going to click upload. And SharePoint wants to know if you want to upload files or a template. You're pretty much always at this level going to do files. So I'm going to select files. And then I just pick the file or files that I wish to upload. It's as simple as that. You can upload multiple files. You just need to select them. Use the standard Windows selection tricks. So you can do shift click or control click to select multiple files. It's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to do one file here. Let's upload the Outlook quick start guide. So I'm just going to select that file. And I'm going to say, I'm just going to click open. And in the modern interface, you'll see a little thing right here. It'll say uploading one item. And then, ta-da, now available, it's already there. And if this was a team site or people are subscribed or following, you could notify the people that there's a new file. Okay, very simple. And now if I scroll down, there it is. The Outlook Quick Start Guide was just uploaded. Okay, the original is still on my D drive in this case. I think I have those files on D. The original is still there. This is a copy. All right, in the classic interface, the steps are similar, but slightly different. We start off by clicking upload. Yep, same thing. And in this case, it's right on the quick access toolbar. So I'm going to click upload. But now, unlike in the modern where I just had a little small thing I could select, here I get this whole business about choosing files and version comments and so on and so forth. Right here where it says choose a file, I'm just going to click browse. You can do the same. Now we're in the same spot here. So again, I could upload single or multiple files. It doesn't really matter. I could select multiple files if I wanted to, or I can just select a single file. So I'm going to upload the same file. I'm going to say open. You don't have to add version comments, okay? We'll talk about versioning and other sorts of stuff in the intermediate classes. So right now I'm happy with all the stuff that's here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And in this case, I get a little progress bar right here. The file will upload. You can see it even uploading right there. It's not a big file, but my internet connection might be a little slow today. There we go. There's the quick start guide. Uploaded. Yay, we're done. Okay, that's simple. That's all I got to do is to upload files. There is a limit of how many you can upload at once and the size, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. And quite honestly, it's so like the numbers on both are so huge that you're really not going to run into a problem unless you're trying to upload like gigantic media files. Other than that, you really shouldn't run into any issues with this as far as uploading. Okay. All right. You can, as I mentioned, upload multiple files, but there is a little bit of an issue when it comes to metadata and check-ins, and we'll talk about that at the end of this section. So, because it applies to everything that we're doing here. So we'll cover that, but I want you to keep in mind that if you do upload multiple files, there are some consequences to that. If it's a single file, if check-in is required, or if there's required metadata, you'll actually get prompted to enter it or deal with it. But if it's multiple files, you don't, so you'll have to manually deal with it. All right, let's go to our second method for getting files into a library or adding files to a library. And that is, I could just start off as new right in the library. So maybe I know that I want a Word document to appear here in SharePoint or an Excel spreadsheet. I could open up Word, create that document, and save it to SharePoint, which we're going to do here in just a few moments. Or another way I could handle it is if I'm already in SharePoint, I could start right from here. That's why we have this new command right here. And we also have it over here in Classic, right? There's a new command. What I can do is I can click that and say, hey, what is the new thing I'd like to create here? Do I want to create a Word document or a PowerPoint? What would you like to create? So I could say, let's create a new Word document. Now, what this will do is it's going to launch you into Word Online, but we have ways around that, and even talked about that in the intro. But for right now, let me just say Word document. So that's going to launch me into this other tab here. I'm going to go into Word Online. I could now create a new document, as soon as it all loads up. So while it's doing that, all this talking. There we go. So now I'm in Word Online. I can start working on this document if I wanted to, or if I want to go to desktop and I don't want to edit it from here, there's a little command right here that says open in desktop app. So I could select that. But I will type a little bit of text here. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Okay, great. I don't want to just call this document. So up top there, I'm going to click where it says document. I'm going to call this the lazy fox. Okay. Right. It just saved it. Now, just for fun to show you, I could go to the open in desktop app. Word will start up. And that little bit of editing that I already did will actually already show up here in Word. Just give it one moment, please. Let's insert a little Jeopardy music here, right? Okay, there's the document. Look, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. That dog is so obnoxious. Oh, sorry, the fox should be. Whatever. There, I added a little text. Since this is stored in SharePoint in the new versions of Office 365 Pro Plus, and especially if the document is already on SharePoint or OneDrive, we have this new auto save feature here. So actually, I don't even need to click save. You can always tell because it actually even says saved right here. But old habits die hard. If you want to click save, you can. So I added a little text there over in desktop. Let me close it in the desktop version. And let me just do resume editing here on the web version. And you'll see, look, there's my changes. And this document is stored in SharePoint. So I could actually edit it here in Word Online, or I can edit it in desktop. Okay, changes were made by me while I was away. Yes, okay, yes, I know. All right, let me just close that tab. Let me come over to this library. And if we look, there's my Lazy Fox document. So I very well could start off in SharePoint if I want to, okay? All right, so Office files can be created as new directly in the library if you're already there, nothing wrong with that. This does save you the trouble of saving to or uploading later, okay? And depending on your settings, you may go into Office Online like I did, or it might actually launch you into desktop, okay? You might actually end up in desktop right away. It just depends on your setting. Depends on the settings of the library set by the library owner. And that was covered in the intro class. All right. Next, we can save directly to a library. That's the opposite of kind of what we did-ish, sort of. This option generally can work better if you've already saved to that library, but this was truer for older versions of Office. In Office 365 Pro Plus, if you've got it all set up right, it's actually really easy to save to to SharePoint. So let's again go through this. So let me start up Word. Okay, let me just bring up Word. And I'll just do a blank document. Okay, and let me just get some text in here real fast. There we go. I've got some text in my document. You're gonna like, how did he do that so fast? Ancient Chinese secret. Oh God, what was that? That was a Calgon, right? The old Calgon commercials. Ancient Chinese secret. Anyways, it's a little trick. Now I want to save this file to SharePoint. I'm ready to save it. So what I can do is I can go to the File menu, and I can go to Save. And if you've got it all connected already, again, especially in Office 365 Pro Plus, I can see all of my SharePoint sites listed over here in the left-hand panel. So you can see I've got, I actually have two different SharePoint areas tenants that I can go to. Actually, I've got my own one, that's this one here, and then I'm actually connected to my one for my work account is also connected through here. So I could save stuff to Planet Technologies if I wanted to, but let me deal with my personal sites. So I'm going to say Sites, Scott Kinsella. All of my sites will be listed here. Look at that, that's great. There's all of the SharePoint sites that I've got. I could go to the Demo Modern site. And then these are all the possible libraries. So I could go to the Documents Modern, excuse me, and there we go. I can give this, we'll just call this random text, and I can save it. And now it's saved directly to SharePoint. That easy. You may have to go through more steps if you're still using like Office 2013 or Office 2016. It's not as easy to save directly to SharePoint, but if you do have Office 2019 or Office 365 Pro Plus, which is what I'm using, it's very easy to do that. In those other products, which I don't have on here anymore, you may have to go through a few extra steps to be able to do that, to be able to save directly to SharePoint. Okay, so that's cool. So again, now this document exists on SharePoint, okay? And I didn't even have to go to the site. I just did it all right from Office. So that's really cool. Okay, our last method, excuse me, save or save as, current and recent libraries will be listed, so on and so forth. You can navigate that whole thing like I just did. All right, now the last method that we have available to us is that we can actually just do simple drag and drop, okay? So what I can do, let me bring up a few windows here, and let me go to, let's go to this here. Got a bunch of files over here in this other window. Let's go into that same quick start guides. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to bring that window over here. You can see I've got a bunch of files here. And now I'm going to bring up SharePoint in the background, and then let's bring this window back to the front. Now this works a little easier if you have dual monitors, but it's kind of hard for me to do that while I'm doing the training, but it still applies. So let me actually even squish this down even further. You can literally just drag files from the Windows Explorer window and drop them onto SharePoint. So let me grab this Word Quick Start Guide. I'm going to just grab, drag, and I'm just going to come over here to the SharePoint window. Now it says move, but you're actually making a copy, so I'm not sure why it says that. So I'm going to drop the file. And you'll actually even see there's the uploading in the background. Look, there it is available. And by the way, this works the same in Classic. You can use Classic or Modern. It doesn't really matter. Either works. And now if I scroll down, there it is. There's the Quick Start Guide. So I can literally just grab a bunch of files from Explorer and just drag them and drop them on the Windows Explorer window, regardless of whether it's the Modern interface or the Classic interface. That's really cool. Okay? All right, so that's another way to get them over there. Okay, if you have one monitor like I just did, it's basically you need to kind of have one window. You know, can either have them tiled or whatever, but you got to be able to see both windows. So make one smaller or whatever. If you got two monitors, like I do here, you can just drag back and forth. That's easy. If you got three monitors, congratulations. Some days I feel like I need three. I'm telling you, I need to have like the whole Star Trek, Star Wars, pick your star battle, whatever. I need like 4 monitors here some days. Okay, now these are the 4 primary methods, but there are more. And we get into more advanced stuff, especially once we get the OneDrive for Business or the OneDrive integration, and we use the sync client. There's just all kinds of other stuff that we can use to get files into libraries. Also, if we get Teams involved, that's another way to get files up into libraries. All of those will be covered in other sessions. I mean, I could literally probably just do 90 minutes on how to get your files into a library. Maybe I will do that. These additional methods are discussed. Okay, yeah, sorry. Sometimes I forget what comes up on the next slide. We'll cover those methods in the intermediate or other classes that I will either offer, or maybe the videos are already out there on YouTube. Who knows? Okay. All right. Now, with all of these methods, no matter which of them you use, there are 2 things that can affect the availability of those files when you do the upload or save as new, especially with uploads. Especially with upload and the drag, these really become more important. The other methods, yes and no, it kind of depends. But anyways, no matter what method you use to add files to a library, there are a couple of things that will affect whether that file appears or is available to use for others once you do that upload or that drag. And those things that can affect that is check-in required on the library, and or does the library require have required metadata or properties that have to be filled out in order to classify the file. In libraries where check-in, check-out is required, you will need to check in the files so that other people can see them and edit them. Okay, that's just part of how the whole process works. If you upload a single file When you drag it there, generally you'll get prompted to say, do you want to check this in? I don't have check-in, check-out set on these libraries, so I'm just going to talk you through how this works. If you don't check the file in, you will still see it, but nobody else will. And I've run into this over the years from people, not as much anymore, but somebody would say, well, I can see the file, but how come Sharon down the hall can't see it? And the first question I'll ask is, did you check it in? What's that? All right, well, you do need to check the file in, okay? The tricky part about this, though, is that you only get prompted to check in if you upload a single file. Unfortunately, there's no interface in SharePoint that if I upload 5 files at once, there's nothing in SharePoint that will allow you to go through the files one at a time to check each one in. You will actually have to manually go to each file and check each one in. Yes, it's kind of a laborious process. Honestly, if you have a mass upload to do, I would go to the library owner and say, hey, can you turn that setting off for a little while so that I don't have to do it? But anyways, that's check-in. So that may affect the ability, the availability of files. The other thing that may affect whether files are available or not when you upload them or however you get them in there is what we call properties or custom metadata. For instance, I might have a library where I want each file to have a type or be classified or just something added to it so that we know what it belongs with. If that information is, if that column or that metadata is optional, it's not going to affect anything with the file. It's still going to be available. But if it's required metadata, yes, that will affect the availability of the file because we don't want people to start using and working on that file if the required metadata is missing. Just like with check-in, if I do upload a single file and there are required properties, I'll get prompted. If there's multiple files, I will have to go to the files and fill out all the metadata manually. Again, I don't have a good example of this on my basic site here, but I will tell you this. In the modern interface, it's easier to fix the properties than in the classic. In classic, it is more work. You got to go through more steps. Fortunately, in the modern interface, there's real easy ways to do all of that. Again, I wish I probably should set up a better example for things like this, but you'll just have to trust me on that, okay? All right. You may even have to deal with both. You may even have to deal with check-in and properties. That's very possible. In all of these cases, generally what the deal is that if it's a single file, you'll get asked to do what you need to do. If it's multiple files, you're going to have to take the initiative to check them in or fill out the custom metadata. That's just how it goes. Okay? If the person who does the uploading fails to do this stuff, the files won't show up for other people. That's just how it goes, okay? All right, so let's summarize this section. There are, as we've seen, multiple methods for getting our files up into a library. Any one of these is valid. Personally, my favorites are the upload and the save directly. Those are the two that I do. I don't as much do the create and I don't do the drag as much, but you may like those methods and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And there's even more methods on top of these. We'll cover those in other classes. No matter what method you use, you must be aware of, is check-in, check-out required, and is there custom metadata, because that's going to affect the file availability, okay? All right. Let's move on now to our next section, and that is opening and editing. Great, you've got the files up there into the library. Now you want to start working on them, or maybe there's already stuff there and you could have skipped that entire section, but now we want to talk about opening and editing the files that are present in our library. Files, as we've already seen, sort of, can be opened and edited directly from SharePoint. That's really part of the beauty of SharePoint libraries nowadays and their integration with Office is you don't have to go through a lot of weird steps. It's seamless. Office and SharePoint take care of all the fun stuff in the background. But what you do need to know is that depending on the library settings, when you click on a file in the library, okay, not if we're in Word or Excel, but if you're already over in the library and you click on a file, one of two things may happen when you do that, okay? And that could be that the file opens into Office Online, or it might go directly to desktop. It might actually go to the desktop application, okay? The problem is you can't tell what's going to happen just by looking at the library. It has nothing to do with the interface. In other words, it has nothing to do with classic versus modern. It's a separate setting. The interface, classic versus modern, is one setting, and then there's a different setting that says open, basically open in browser or open in app. They're two separate settings that the library owner can change. Fortunately, we can use either one depending on what you're doing, and we'll get into that. Generally speaking, nowadays with SharePoint Online, the default is to open files in Office Online if they're Office files. Again, that could be changed, okay? All right. And just to clarify, sorry, there's one more slide here. Just to clarify Office Desktop, that's the version of Office you run off of Windows that you've been using for a million years, right? Office 2013, 2016, 2019, Office 365 Pro Plus. There's a lot of versions out there. Hopefully you're running Office 365 Pro Plus. That really is the best version of them out there. If you've got questions about one versus the other, that's a topic for another class. Okay? Office Online, as we've already just seen, are the lightweight ones that open up in our browser, okay? In Office 365, we have Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and OneNote all available in online versions. And if you are, and they're part of your Office 365 subscription. Basically, if you've got SharePoint Online, you've already got the online applications. They're there, okay? All right. And as we already saw, and I'm going to do examples for these, you can always go to desktop when you're in online. So let's do some examples here about what I'm talking about. So let's come back over to here. So I've got this library, and it is the modern view, but, or I'm sorry, not the modern view, the modern interface. I want to click on a file and let's see what happens, all right? Again, there's no way to know from here what's going to happen. So I'm just going to click on this cookbook document. So I'm just going to click it, and oh, looks like it opens up in Word Online. So there we go. It opened up another tab, and I'm in Word Online. The online version of the product is a lightweight version, just to review what we just said on the slides a few moments ago. Word Online, Excel Online, all of them are similar to the desktop products, but they aren't the full desktop product because there's no way to make a full-blown version of Word that will run in your web browser. It's just not possible. But we do have a lot of cool things that we can do in this online application that we've got here, this Word Online. And even if you end up here and you're like, oh, I don't really want to do that, there's features I want, or I just don't like Word Online, which I do hear that plenty. Excuse me. You can always just get to desktop right here where it says open in desktop app. I can just click that, and voila, Word's going to start up, and that document will be open in desktop Word. I can edit it just like I did earlier. I can edit, work with this document. It is opening and saving directly from SharePoint, and I'm good to go. Okay. All right, so let's close that, and let's close that. Don't like to have too many tabs open here when I'm doing these trainings because it slows things down. Okay, now let's go over a classic library and see what happens there. So I've got this classic library. All right, there's a bunch of files. Let's pick that same document. Again, same document, different library. Cookbook 10. Oh, well, look at that. Opened up in Word Online as well. So like I said, doesn't matter whether it's classic or modern. That has nothing to do with how the file is going to open when I click it. So once again, I ended up in online. Okay, now I could have configured that differently, but I didn't. Same thing applies here, though. I could say open in desktop. All right, now let's go back. Now, yes, once we get into online, you can always jump over to desktop if you want. But there's an additional thing that we can learn, or a little trick here that I want to show you. PowerPoint. even if the default, whether it's classic or modern, even if the default is to open up in Office Online, there's a way to get around that so that you can go directly to desktop. Or as I always say, this is the Monopoly go to jail option, right? Do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to jail. Or in this case, do not pass Office Online, go directly to Office Desktop. We can do that here. Similar shortcuts, so let's do it. So let me come over to here. So in the modern library, I'm going to select that same cookbook document, but I need to select it. Don't click the name of the file. Click the thing next to it, the selection circle. I'm going to click that selection circle, and then I'm going to come up here to the ribbon, and you'll notice there's an open command. And I'm going to click that drop down, and now I have options. I can open in browser, or I can open in app. Oh, I can skip the whole browser online business and I can go directly to the stuff. I can go directly to the desktop. So there we go. Let me do open an app. And after a few moments, it goes right to desktop. I didn't even have to go through that whole step about online. I just skipped right past it, even though the default for that library was online. I was able to skip it by going through that menu. Okay? Yay! Now, in Classic, similar steps, but slightly different. The first step is the same. You're going to select the file, so select the checkbox next to it. Don't click the name of the file. Select the checkbox next to it. But this time what you're going to do is you're going to go up to the Files tab, or maybe it's already visible. And on the Files tab, there's no Open Document command here, but there's an Edit Document command. So I'm going to select Edit Document. Now, unfortunately, in this case, there's no choice like we had over in Modern, but the only choice is to skip directly to desktop. So in this case, when we say Edit Document, ta-da, here we go. I'm now right over in Word on the desktop. Okay? So it's possible when I'm opening and working with files that are on SharePoint, two things may happen. I may end up in Office Online, or I might end up in desktop. It's a separate setting from the interface. In either case, I can bypass that and go right to desktop if I want to. No matter what method we're using, whether we're editing in online or whether we're editing in desktop, everything transparently opens and saves right back to SharePoint. Okay, this is not like 30 years ago, if you wanted to edit something online, you'd have to download it from the website, save it somewhere local, open that file up, edit it, and then re-upload to some sort of site. Those days are long gone. Now with Microsoft Office, it pretty much always saves it to where it found it. So if it finds the file on OneDrive, that's where it's going to save it back to. Did it find it on H? Okay, it's going to open and save it from there. Oh, was it on SharePoint? I will open and save it from there. Office takes care of all of that in the background, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay? Another really cool thing to note is that if you do open files from SharePoint, they all get added to the recent menu over here in Word, Excel, and all the other applications. So once I've opened a file from SharePoint, it's going to appear right here, right? I can go into Word or any of the desktop applications, and I don't even have to go to SharePoint, right? I can go right to here and say, oh, yeah, let me open up this document. The location is right below here. So this tells me where it's located. So I can click there. And again, regardless of whether it's on the C drive, the H drive, OneDrive, or SharePoint, they're all there in the recent list. So I don't necessarily have to go all the way out to SharePoint to find the document that I want to edit. If I edited it recently, it's going to be in my recent list in any of these applications. So that's cool. Okay. Now, I've only been talking about Office files. What about things that aren't Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, and so on and so forth? It all depends on what the manufacturer and what type of integration it has with SharePoint. That's a long, complicated, not my business right now. It's really going to depend. PDFs a lot of time do open in the browser, but that all depends on how you've configured your browser to open PDFs. So let's just stay with the Office files. So to summarize this section, Office files opened from SharePoint will either open in Office Online or in desktop. Regardless of the default, you can usually get around to one or the other. Remember also, how those open is not tied to the interface. The interface is no indication, classic modern, is no indication of online versus desktop. And most important thing I think to remember about opening and editing files that are in SharePoint, look, if you open it from SharePoint, it's going to save back to SharePoint. There are no weird steps that you have to go through to deal with the file. Okay? All right, so let's move on to our next section, managing files. So in this section, we want to talk about kind of all those basic file management commands that we have available to us. Now, some of these I'm going to go through quickly because they're pretty straightforward. Other things are ones that, because it's new or unique in SharePoint, I will want to spend a little bit of time on that. These are what we call the process features. That was a thing I talked a lot about in the intro classes, this whole thing of content features versus process features. The content features and things are where we put our information, and the process features are the things that allow us to do stuff to that content. And this is some, or about a dozen of, the process features that we have available to us in that content feature of a library. Some of these things can be done by anybody because all we're doing is changing how we look at stuff. So we don't, here comes that thing about permissions again. We don't need to worry, you know, even if I have read permission, I can sort, filter, and view and select and preview files pretty easy. But if I want to do things like editing and renaming and deleting and copying, yes, I'm going to need additional permissions to do that. So of course, remember, permissions matter here when we do these different process features. And there we go again. Remember, what you're allowed to do depends on permissions. Okay? All right. Now, before we do the commands, here's the tricky-ish part. Where do I find them? Well, as I mentioned earlier, in Classic, it's pretty easy to find all the commands because they're either on either tab of the ribbon up here, or yeah, there's a 3-dot menu that does have a lot of commands on it, and I can go through the different hierarchical 3-dot commands and I can get there. Not as needed in Classic interface because they're all up here anyways. In the modern interface, by its nature, because it's simplified, a lot of commands, yes, are hiding under 3-dot menus. So when I select a file, I might need to go to the 3-dot menu here to pick one of the things, to find the feature that I'm looking for. Or I might need to, on that file, go to its individual 3-dot menu down here to find the command that I'm looking for. Fortunately, most of them are duplicated in both spots, but you may find one is in one place and not the other. So you just got to kind of look all around for those commands. Okay? All right, so with that being said, let's go through the simple ones. First off, sorting. Okay, sorting is pretty straightforward. Click on the headings. We talked about this earlier. Your headings allow you to sort. You can do basically A to Z or Z to A, you know, ascending or descending. So I could sort my files. I can switch that around here to descending order, Z to A, or I could have them in ascending order. There we go. Remember, folders are always still first. In Classic, it's the same thing. I just got to click the drop down and select which one I want. Okay? Not difficult. Next, filters. Now, filters do work different in Classic versus Modern. So let's take a look at Classic first. In Classic view, to get a filter, you'd click the drop down. Oh, I need one that has filters on it. Sorry, let's take that off of that file. Let me go to Modified By. If there are filters available for a column, they'll be listed here. Now, this is not a great example because we've got all the same metadata here, but if there were different authors or modified bys for these files, all of those different authors would be listed here, and I could actually select the ones I want to see, and that would filter out the ones I don't want to see. So I would just see a subset of the files. I think on modified, I can do a range of time here. Oh yeah, great. Let me say I want to see only things from 3/26/2020. There we go. I just see that folder. All right, now maybe I want to see everything from 4/9. Okay, those are the things I just uploaded, okay? And now I want to clear all those filters to see all the files. Okay. In modern view, it's similar, but when I come to a menu, when I come to a header and click on it, you don't get the options here. What you do see is something that says filter by, and what that's going to do is open up a panel over on the side, and then it's going to present the options over here on the panel. So this is one of the things about the modern interface that doesn't thrill me. To me, it kind of forces me to go extra steps. That's just what we've got here, but I can do again the same thing. Say, well, I only want to see these files, so I can apply that filter. My nose is really itchy today. Sorry about that. And I can just see, whatever files I want to see with that filter applied, right? If I want to then change or remove that filter, I can click the drop down. I can click the drop down. There we go. Bring up the filter by menu again, clear all, and apply. So it's more steps over in modern. So this is where I give modern. In this case, classic to me wins over modern. Filters are a lot easier to do over in the classic view. Okay. Next, let's talk views. We talked about this a little bit already, but I want to expand on it just a little bit here. And that is, in both classic and modern, we can build different ways to view the files, okay? And that can involve built-in sorts, built-in filtering, group by, totals. There's like 14 different properties and things that you can do to add to a view. And those views, if they've been made for you in the library, can be found in modern. They'd be listed here. Now, I have not created any extra ones, but they would be right in the middle of this menu right here where it currently says all documents. You'd see there's a larger list of things available there. In classic view, if there's other views created, they'll be listed right here above the column headers. As you can see here in this library, I didn't feel the need to have any, so there aren't any. The only view that's available here is the all documents view. Over here in some other lists, I've built some other views, but we'll talk more about that in the lists class tomorrow, or you can watch it probably right now after this video if you want to watch. Okay. All right, so views just change how we look at the files. It may display different columns. It may hide certain files based on filters. It may group and sort those files. It's a convenient way to apply multiple settings all at once to view things. You actually have experienced views in lots of places, primarily over in Outlook. Outlook makes use of views a lot. You probably just didn't realize it. It's a great feature over here in SharePoint, and we'll explore it a lot more in another class. All right, we've already seen this feature of our ability to select files when we are in both classic and modern. So I don't think I need to rehash this here. When you select a file, you're not clicking on it to edit it or open it. You're selecting it so you can perform some sort of action on it. Because we're in a web browser, if I click on something, that's hyperlinked, it's going to open it. So we have to have a way to say, I want to do something to this file, but I don't want to open it. I want to do other stuff. So that's the selection, and we already saw that. So I'm not going to waste any more time on that here. You can preview a file. In the modern view, the modern interface, if I just hover over the file, I will get I'll get a little rendering of the file here. I can see some of the text down here. Sometimes you'll get a picture of the file depending on what you've got, depending on how complex the file is, but all I need to do is just hover over it. And sometimes it takes a little while to generate because SharePoint literally has to look inside the file for things. Over in the classic view, this is a little different. You actually click on the three-dot menu and the preview is the first thing you see. And again, in this case, I see a larger thumbnail of the actual file. I actually kind of like this feature better over in Classic because it does actually allow me to see a lot more of the file if you're kind of into these whole file previews. Okay? All right. Next, the file properties. There are several built-in properties, but we can always add more. And the basic ones are, look, what kind of file is it? What's the name of the file? When was it created and when was it modified? You can see some of that already, like the type, which is the icon, the name, the modified, and the modified by. But there's actually a little bit more information here. In the modern view, to access oh, I'm sorry, however in Classic, so we'll just do in Classic. In Classic view, just select the file, and you can go to the Files tab and say View Properties. And when I do that, that navigates me to another page here, and it shows me the name and title. And then it also shows me created, date and time and person, and same thing, modified date, time, and person, and also the file version. So there's a bunch of stuff here. There could be lots more depending on how we have configured this library. Okay, and I'll just close that. Over in Modern, the way we can view the properties is similar, but it displays them differently. So let me just go with this Tron article, same thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it, but this time I'm going to click on the little details pane or the information symbol over here. And that is going to display all that file information, as well as of a bunch of other stuff. That's what's cool over here, is not only do I see now also the file preview, but I also see all of the file properties here. So there's a lot of that information is right down here, as well as there's the activity. There's more stuff down there at the bottom. So there's all kinds of stuff there about the file that I can view from that details pane. So again, select the file and click the information symbol, and you can see all of that stuff in one panel, as well as the preview. So what's kind of cool over here in Modern is there's more information and the file preview is there as well. It was also over in the other area. Now, up to this point, all of those things that we just did in the library don't require any special permissions. Anybody can do it as long as they can read and get into the library. Everything else now that I'm going to talk about does require, additional permissions, at least contribute. Now, some of these things we've already done. We already did editing, so I don't need to talk about that anymore. Look, click the file name and have it open. We can do other basic things like renaming the files, okay? That's a standard Windows thing. Just select the rename command. As in Windows, there are characters you have to avoid. The other recommendation, avoid extremely long names for files in SharePoint, less than 100. That's just a personal recommendation. They can be longer, but long file names pose problems in SharePoint. You can also share files. This is a whole class in and of itself, but let me just say this. By its nature, things that are in a SharePoint library are already shared because some sort of permission has been set up there to say, okay, this group of people can work with these files. So you don't need to reshare, if there's a group of 10 of us that already have access to that library, I don't need to share the files with them because they're already shared. Where sharing becomes important or relevant in SharePoint is if I'm trying to share with somebody who's outside that group. My ability to do that depends on whether I'm the owner or not of the library. If I want to share a file with somebody outside of the group and I use the share command and I'm the library owner, it'll go right through. It'll share that file with that person. They'll get the notification, it will all work. If you're not the owner, then what will happen is the owner gets a notification that the file has been, you've shared the file, that somebody else has shared the file, and they then have to approve or reject that and say, nope, you're not sharing outside this group, or yes, you can share that file. Often we don't use that very much because that gets really into what we call file permission, item level permissions in SharePoint, and that's a real pain in the butt to deal with. So generally speaking, don't share individual files in SharePoint. We do it a lot more in OneDrive, but SharePoint gets a little fussier. Hey, we can delete stuff. Y'all know how to do that. And just like in Windows, if I delete a file, it goes into the recycle bin. I can always get it out up to 90 days, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. If I delete a file, you're not going to see it in your recycle bin because everybody has their own separate recycle bins. And that's for security reasons. So I'm only going to ever see files that I've personally deleted in the recycle bin. And if I decide that I need to restore something, yes, you can do that. You have, it's actually 93 days, I think it is, because that's basically 31 times 3. You have 93 days to restore a file. Beyond that, you do need to contact a site administrator to help you out. Basically, my rule of thumb is if you need it, don't delete it. If you're unsure, just leave it there. You got plenty of storage. There's nothing to worry about. Just leave your files there. You can copy and move files. Now, I will say this. In the classic interface, this is awful. It was always a bad thing in SharePoint with Classic to be able to try to copy files from one place to another. It's possible by using an odd command called send to, and what you actually end up doing is that you select the file, you go to the files menu, and then you go to this where it says send to, and you can send a copy to another library, but you have to have the link and you got to paste it, which means you needed to do all that stuff. You need to copy that link before you get here. And it's just really just kind of a pain in the butt. It's just not very elegant. Over in the modern interface, and this is where modern really wins hands down, it is very easy in the modern interface to both copy and move files to other libraries. All I need to do is select the file, and then in this case, I can go to the 3-dot menu and I can select either move to or copy to, and I can do one file or multiple files, depending on what I select. So if I say copy to, you get this very simple navigation pane over on the left that says, where do you want to copy it to? So do you want to make a copy or a move? Now I just did copy here, but if I did the move, it'd be the same stuff. Do I want to copy it to a folder in my library? Do I want to copy it over to OneDrive? Do I want to copy it to a different site, a different library? It's very, very easy. You just navigate through the pane and just drill down to where you need to go and then just say copy or move. It's awesome. It's so easy. I love it. Oh, thank you. It is so easy to do over here in the modern interface of SharePoint. Unfortunately, you can't, in Classic, it's terrible. Classic just still has this old send to copy. You can't move stuff. It's hard to do multiple files. It's just very, very clunky and difficult. There's actually a cheat way around that, and that is download everything, use Windows Explorer to move things between. I'm just not going to get into it and say, you know what? Use the modern interface. Okay? All right, so we can do copy and move. You can also download files from SharePoint to your local workstation. I would use this very, very sparingly because remember, when you download something, even when you upload, you're always making a copy, right? When you upload to a location or you download from a location, the file always stays in its original spot. You're making a copy of it. And as always with copies, there's always that risk that you edit or work with the wrong one. So be very careful about that. And especially in SharePoint, if you're downloading something so that you can work on it while you're on a plane or you're traveling, well, that's nice, but what about the file that's still out on SharePoint that everybody else might be editing while you're gone? That's where there's a problem. So there's other ways around that, especially getting OneDrive involved helps with that situation. And again, we'll talk about that in later classes. So just be really careful about downloading, unless you do want to make a copy of the file and you want to kind of use that as a starting point for something else, then yes, by all means, go ahead and download a copy. But don't download a copy if you just want to work on something on your own and then you think you're going to upload it later. You're asking for trouble. Okay? All right. These 12 commands are not the only 12 things that we can do in a library. They're the 12 basic ones you should know here in a basics class, but they're not the only things. And those other things we'll get to in intermediate and advanced classes and other just types of classes here with SharePoint. But as you work in a library, hopefully you've noticed that a lot of these things are similar things that you can do, in places like Outlook and Windows and so on and so forth. So our SharePoint libraries do have many basic and familiar file management commands to help us work with and manage the files in a library. Pretty straightforward. At least I think so. I hope you think so too after seeing this. All right. I want to take a few minutes. I know we're running a little bit late here, but I do want to, so hopefully you all just stick around. Those of you online, it doesn't really matter, or those of you watching the video, it doesn't matter. But for those of you attending, I apologize, but I want to address this topic because it is important. So give me an extra 5 minutes or so of your time, please, and let's talk file storage and sharing options. So as we move into this modern environment and we get more options, it really does, what we do and where we put things and how we share things with each other really does become more complex, unfortunately. But it's in some ways, there's easy ways to think about these things. The 4 places that we tend to put files or have them is we trade things over email, we store stuff on the network or our local computer, we put files up on our OneDrive or OneDrive for Business, depending on what you're using, and then there's also SharePoint like we talked about here. We could also bring Teams into the discussion. The interesting thing about Teams, though, is depending on what you're doing, Teams actually just uses OneDrive and SharePoint for its storage, depending on where you were working with the file. So that's why I've not included Teams just yet on this in this presentation. Actually, I'll probably do that as another separate class of how Teams integrates with all that sort of stuff. Just to run through some points here to help guide you as to where or how to share or exchange files when you're dealing with it. Look, first off, emailing files to people is technically not sharing. We think of it that way, but really what you need to think of email as is that you're sending somebody a copy. Because really nowadays in the modern office, when we talk about sharing a file, what we really mean is we have one file and we're allowing multiple people to have access to that same file. If you email a file to somebody, you have 2 files. So we need to think of our definition of shared files a little different now, is that email is making a copy of a file that somebody else is going to edit the separate one. And that also means that we can't collaborate, okay? Again, in the modern office, when we talk about collaboration, we are again talking about we have a file and multiple people are in the same file at the same time working together. Again, if I email a copy to somebody, sure, we can collaborate, but you're working on your copy and I'm working on my copy, and then somehow we have to bring them together later. That's a nightmare. That's not collaboration. So, multiply that by many users and we've got a problem. That's not to say that emailing files to each other is a bad idea. If I just need Mary to have a copy of a file, or I just want her to look at it, there's no problem with me emailing that file to her. But if I want to collaborate with Mary, John, and Richard on a file, I should not email it. I should use one of the other options. Now, networks, yes, for the longest time have been the place where we share files, because yes, you could set up your company may set up an H drive or S drive or T or whatever letter they use, and you could put the files out there and everybody can get to them, and we think of it as a shared network folder. But again, in modern offices now, when we talk about sharing, we're talking about changing permissions for people to get to that file in real time. And the other disadvantage of networks, like we already talked about, is that networks just store files. We don't have any process features. Networks don't support metadata or properties, right? When you put a file out on the network, you just get basic information like the file type, and when it was modified. That's really it. Whereas on SharePoint, we have lots of information about files. We can create all the custom things that we want. And now next, additionally, we don't really share and collaborate on a network, right? If files are stored on the network, sure, I can work on it, then Mary can work on it, then Joe can work on it, but we all can't work on it together at the same time if it's on a network. If it's on OneDrive or SharePoint, we can all work together in real time, okay? So networks can sort of share, but you can't collaborate, all right? And again, in the modern definition-ish of sharing, even networks, technically, we're not really sharing, like we should think of it nowadays. Now, OneDrive and SharePoint are very similar. As a matter of fact, the kind of the engine that drives both really is kind of the same, but there are some major differences between them. In some ways, yes, you could think of OneDrive as SharePoint Lite, but don't say that SharePoint and OneDrive are the same thing. They are different, but they are the same. I know that's a really strange statement to make. I don't want to get overly technical and detailed about it, but yes, the main driver underneath both is SharePoint to some extent, but OneDrive has certain features locked in or changed, so you can't use them. Basically it uses the modern interface. For instance, there's no real classic interface to OneDrive. There's just lots of other things. I don't want to get all into it. So in some ways they're very similar, but other ways there are differences. And the main difference between OneDrive and SharePoint is this. OneDrive is your personal fiefdom, your personal kingdom, your personal neighborhood, whatever you want to think it of. You're the owner. You control it. You are the one that says, who can get in and who doesn't, okay? OneDrive does support sharing and collaboration natively. So in my OneDrive, can say, hey, Mary, you can get in and use this file. I'm going to give you permission. And we give those permissions, we give them and we take them away on the fly as we need them. Because since it's my personal space, by default, everything is just me. But because I am the owner, I can say, hey, you can use this and you can use this. OneDrive, in that sense, should be used for personal, limited sharing. So what I shouldn't do in OneDrive is put a file there and then try to share it with my entire department. That's not a good idea. Okay, there's multiple reasons why that's a bad idea, especially if it's like, okay, folks, here's this form I want you to all use, and I'm going to put it on OneDrive, and I'll share it out with all of you, and you can all use that file. There's a lot of reasons why that's bad, and the main one is, if you ever leave the company, your OneDrive goes away. Okay, that will generally be turned off, and now all those people you shared that file with are not going to be able to get to it anymore. So it really should have gone out on SharePoint. OneDrive is for peer-to-peer limited sharing. So, hey, Mary, let's work on this file together. I need us to collaborate on it, but we only need to collaborate for a couple of weeks. So I share it with her. We do the stuff we need to do. When we're done, I unshare it, and then maybe I post it out to SharePoint or Teams later. Okay. So that brings us about SharePoint. SharePoint is the place where, again, we have sharing and collaboration capabilities, but it's a larger scale. It's meant for groups and departments and so on and so forth. The main difference here about sharing, though, is that the sharing's already set up. Okay, in SharePoint, a group of people or your department already have complete access to everything that goes in a particular spot. That's convenient. That's the way it should be. So that is managed generally by a site owner or a site collection administrator or something like that, as far as what those permissions and how all that works. Just like OneDrive, though, SharePoint does support sharing and collaboration. So I could say, hey, department, I'm putting this proposal out there. I want everybody's feedback. I want everybody in that file and doing the things I need you to do. And we can all do it in real time as we need, together or as we need to in that file, because SharePoint does support that. Networks don't. OneDrive and SharePoint does. So SharePoint is ideal for peer-to-group unlimited sharing. So I put something on SharePoint. Once it's there, it stays there. And even if I leave the company, it's still there for everyone else to work on. This is not to say that any of these things are bad. Don't get me wrong. Networks are not bad and email is not bad. It's just to say, make sure you use them for the right use case scenarios. And often now, use OneDrive and SharePoint. Matter of fact, more and more companies are starting to eliminate networks in general and they're moving everything to OneDrive and SharePoint. That's happening a lot more. In fact, one of my clients, I think, is planning to do that sometime later this year. They've said, yeah, we kind of want to get rid of our network storage and we're going to move everything to OneDrive and SharePoint. So kudos to them. That just means more money for me. No, it doesn't. I wish it did. Okay. There are many options for file storage and sharing. Just have a good understanding of them and which to use when. So thank you for this little extra time. Hold on, we're almost done. I know I'm running over. I hate to do that, but I just want y'all to have this information. I feel like it's so important. All right. Hey, there's review slides here. These are just the summary slides that are found throughout the presentation. So those of you, again, that are on the training right now, you got the file. Take a look at it. You can look at these slides. For those of you that are watching this on YouTube, I haven't yet figured out where to publish these files, so maybe maybe the link's there now in the description so you can see it and you can download these. Otherwise, just pause the recording and read each slide as you go through. But these are just basically the summaries that we already saw throughout the presentation. So lastly, in our final wrap up, look, do you need some more help? Hey, we always need more help, right? If you want to learn some more things about SharePoint, look, I really do highly recommend Microsoft's website at support.office.com. There are support and help and articles for all of their products out there. So I really do highly recommend there. Just go to that site, click on the SharePoint icon, which looks like the one on the screen, and you can find all kinds of articles and help files and things about SharePoint there. If you're a bit more techie minded, you can go to docs.microsoft.com, and that gets more into the nuts and bolts and technical side of SharePoint. But hey, if that interests you, go ahead and take a look. But I wouldn't recommend that for the Joe Schmo end user type unless you're really curious. Hey, as far as me, well, hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, you already found my channel and you're looking at the videos there. So thanks. For those of you on the call today, again, I think most of you now know the routine. Some of you, that's how you found out about these, was from YouTube to Facebook, as I'm about to talk about, and that's cool as well. But for more classes that I've done, these in-depth classes, you know, hey, there's tons of those short videos out there, right? There's tons of 5-minute videos. I distinguish myself by putting out these full-length classes for free, so that you can really, you know, watch, take your time, learn, and not feel rushed. And I'm not rushed either. But again, just search for my name out there if you haven't already. If you want to know about more of these online trainings that I do for free, jump on over to Facebook and look for the Beardy MCT. That would be me. That's my group on Facebook. It's a public group. Anybody can join it. And that is where you'll find any live training events that I do. I try to just, as my time allows it. Right now I'm doing a lot because I have a lot of time, but that'll come and go. But as there are more events, just join that group. And I always invite the entire group to the event, so you've got some sort of reminder. That's it. That's all. Again, I apologize for running a bit over. I hope you found that extra time. Now, don't run away for those of you that are attending online right now, because I will do some Q&A. Y'all have been quiet today. That's great. But hey, that happens. But we'll stick around, see if y'all have some questions. For those of you that are watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching this. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you take the time to watch other videos, learn stuff, and be productive in what you do with SharePoint.